welcome to Moonshot. I'm Christopher Lawson, and as we've previously discussed on the show, the global population is expected to reach more than 9 billion people by 2050, which means we need to dramatically improve our food production so that we can meet the increased demand. But when we think about making our food sustainable, often it's easy to gravitate towards the people who are reinventing what we think about as food. We looked at people who are 3D printing our foods and those who are coming up with plant-based alternatives to meat. But the one thing we haven't really explored is the way we actually grow and farm our foods, because there's no point making a plant-based burger if you can't actually get the plants. And it turns out there's a bunch of interesting players in this space, and today we're going to focus on just one of them, Square Roots.
Square Roots is an attempt really to bring real food, locally grown food that you can trust to literally every single person on the planet. If we sort of fast forward to 2050, there'll be about 10 billion people on the planet, up from 7 or so today. And what's really interesting is about 70% of them will live in urban areas. It's kind of very well known that locally grown food is just better for people. It's certainly better for the planet. And, what we want to do is bring locally grown food to those billions of people that live in the cities. And so the way that we do that is we build urban farms in the cities, farms in the same zip code as the consumer, and we build indoor controlled climate urban farms. And what that does is allow us to grow this really incredible food literally all year round, right next to the people that are going to eat it. So my name is Tobias. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Square Roots. The real magic in the system are the farmers. We very much believe that the consumer doesn't just want the food, they actually want a connection with the people that grow the food. And so, unlike some other urban farming companies that maybe are focused more on robotics and automation and trying to get the sort of farmer out of the system, we very much believe that the farmer is central to the system. We are technologists, and we built what we call a farmer-first technology platform that really surrounds that farmer with all the tools and data and insights that they need to grow as much food as possible, using the fewest resources possible, and then get that out into the local community and give everyone the ability to eat this really tasty, healthy, and nutritious locally grown food.
Tobias founded Square Roots in 2016 along with his business partner Kimbal Musk. And yes, before you all start sending me emails asking questions, Kimbal is the brother of Elon Musk. Now, Square Roots is based in Brooklyn, which is obviously an urban area, and they're really getting in on the urban farming revolution by focusing on vertical farms, which they're housing in repurposed shipping containers. The advantage of these systems is that they're very modular, they're easy to move and install, and they can get a significant amount of yield for the size of land that they sit on.
When you think about farming in the city, you've really got to think about how you use resources in a different way, right? We have a 20-acre farm here at Square Roots in the middle of New York. And there's no way anybody is going to give me 20 acres of real estate in New York to build that farm, right? And so we had to think about a smart way to do it. And vertical farming allows you to be very smart using space, right? So if you imagine taking an outdoor field and then turning that on its end and hanging that field off the ceiling inside a building, and then racking that field back to back to back, what you're now doing is growing food in 3 dimensions instead of 2 dimensions. And so you're able to get a lot more food out of the same size footprint. So specifically for Square Roots, we build our farms inside refurbished shipping containers. 12 months ago, they might have been shipping bananas from South America to China or something. We use those containers, and then we use a whole bunch of technologies around vertical growing towers and climate control systems, and there's a ton of sensors in there that are tracking all the environmental data, and there's AI running in the background. But the bottom line is we're now able to grow food in 3D instead of 2D. So in a typical 40-foot shipping container, which is 320 square feet footprint, you're able to get on an annual yield basis about the same amount of food as you would do from a 2-acre outdoor farm. And so, we have a 20-acre farm here in Brooklyn, but it's actually housed inside 10 shipping containers that literally are placed on a disused parking lot in Brooklyn. Existing sort of city infrastructure that's being underutilized, you can kind of back in these shipping containers. They're basically like a farm in a box, and start growing food next to the people that are eventually going to eat it.
Now, growing food in a climate-controlled box sounds like a really great idea. But the real question many of you are probably wondering is what foods can actually be grown in these conditions?
When you think about indoor farming today, a lot of the food that's grown is leafy greens and herbs. And there's a reason for that. It's not so much the capability, right? You're capable in these systems of growing pretty much anything. It's actually more about economics, right? Because these systems that use artificial lighting, that require climate control, they're essentially requiring energy, right? And, when you're growing a plant, basically the more biomass that the plant, is creating, right? The heavier the vegetable, if you want to put it in plain English, the more energy it takes, right? And so the more expensive the production of that plant is. So if you think about leafy greens, lettuce, kale, arugula, there's not too much biomass that you're creating there. And so it doesn't need that much energy. And you can get a product to market today at a very competitive price with field farmers and sort of other production systems. As you go down the scale and try to create more biomass, fruits and roots, right? Strawberries, blueberries, tomatoes, those things, more biomass requires more energy. Today they might be slightly too expensive to get to market. The good news though with these indoor farming systems is that, unlike a field farmer, a field farmer can't suddenly look at the sun and say, hey, sun, can you be twice as efficient tomorrow because I want to grow twice as much food for the same cost? Whereas in these indoor systems, of course, we're technologists, right? And so we can make the lighting system twice as efficient over time. And, eventually, and we're probably talking, like 6 to 18 months to get sort of blueberries, strawberries, tomatoes to market at a competitive price. And then, maybe another 18 months beyond that when we start to see sort of roots, beetroots, carrots, all these things get to market at a competitive price. But we're growing all of those things in our R&D farms right now, and they are absolutely delicious. And then as we keep working on the technology, especially the lighting technology to bring that cost down, you'll start to see them get to market very, very rapidly.
Now, Square Roots is hardly the only company playing in this urban farming space. There's a lot of companies building farms in a box or farms which contain layers of plants and are housed in warehouses. And the potential of all these ideas is very clear to investors. Square Roots has raised $5.4 million to make this idea a reality. But what makes the Square Roots model different from many of the others is the focus on the farmer. Each Square Roots farm is managed by an individual farmer who is trained to take ownership of the farm and look after the crops. And what's interesting is that when you look at the profiles of all these farmers, they look very different from what your traditional idea of a farmer might be. They're very young and many come from other industries. So what does it actually take to become a Square Roots farmer?
So in the US, the average age of an American farmer is 58 years old, right? There's a whole generation of farmers right now that are basically feeding the nation that are about to retire. And the next generation is not wanting to work on those farms, right? What they want to do is live in the city, right? And be, hipsters in Brooklyn. And there's actually a massive sort of demographic problem that the country will be facing, is that there's just no one there ready to take over these big industrial farms in the middle of the country. We sort of realized that, with growing population and people wanting more local food and that growing population being sort of urban dwellers, we had to figure out urban farming. And there just aren't, people that have been trained in this field, right? And so that was part of the reason we set up the we call it the Farmer Entrepreneurship Program at Square Roots, is that, we sort of realized that, okay, well, by 2050, we're going to need millions of people who understand what urban farming is across the world. And there are not millions of people there today who understand this, right? So we've got to start to jump in really quickly and start to train people how to figure this out. And, the best way to train someone is to, give them a farm and let them get on with it, right? And they'll sort of figure it out and make mistakes and figure out the right way to do it. And of course, we have expert farmers on our team that are helping them sort of every day through that process. But there's nothing like spending 12 months, getting your hands dirty in one of these systems to learn how to do it. Of course, what I should say is these people are not really getting their hands dirty because we're using a hydroponic system. So there's no soil in the farm, but you get the point.
How is what you're doing sort of like changing people's perception in the community about food? And what impact are you seeing from the farm on the community around where you are?
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. When we started the company, right, we sort of grappled with this quite a bit. People have got this very kind of sepia-tinged romantic notion of what a farmer is, in the field chewing a, stick of wheat or whatever it is. And we're like, okay, well, we've got, 100 kilowatt hours of electricity flashing these pink lights, at plants in a steel box in a parking lot in Brooklyn. Like it's a different type of farm. And, how are people going to react to that? And we sort of zeroed in on this idea that, or this realization that really people have really lost trust in the industrial food system, right? The issues, again, certainly in America, whether that's diabetes or obesity or pollution or climate change, like you can draw very direct lines to all of those issues to the industrial food system, and consumers en masse are turning against that, and they want something else, right? What they want is food that they can trust. They want to know where it's come from. And so what we decided to do at Square Roots was really own that, right? How can we bring transparency into the total supply chain? So we built our farms with huge windows on the end, so literally anyone walking by in the neighborhood can look in and see what's going on and see the farmers working. And then we host sort of open house farm tours every other week at the farm. We probably get maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people a month come through the farm just to hear what's going on and, talk to the farmers and taste the food. And so by taking that approach of, okay, we're going to own transparency, we're literally going to show everyone what's going on 24 hours a day. And, we try to get as many people to the farm as possible to taste the food. And then once they tasted the food and they, more to the point, tasted food that was harvested, maybe an hour ago from a farmer that they're having a conversation with, and it's food that they can trust and it tastes delicious because it's so fresh, people's minds are blown, and then, and that's essentially how we're sort of marketing and building the business, right? Getting as many people to the farm as possible.
And we'll have more of our interview with Square Roots co-founder and CEO Tobias Peggs right after this break. Welcome back to Moonshot. I'm Christopher Lawson, and before the break we were speaking with Square Roots co-founder and CEO Tobias Peggs about how the company is changing our perception of what a farmer is. And we know that vertical farms can produce a lot more yield than traditional farms. But when you think about what's involved in any type of urban farm, you've got the time involved in planting and maintaining the crops, but you also have the cost of using artificial lighting and running systems to make sure that the air is at a constant temperature, and you have computer systems to constantly monitor the crops, and then you have the cost of land. In many cities, land is a really valuable resource. Even just a small amount of it can be incredibly expensive. So what are the costs like for actually making these farms happen?
Specifically on the real estate question, this is the one I'm actually really excited about. Real estate in the city is expensive, and that is why we don't farm in 2 dimensions, we farm in 3 dimensions, right? So we're using way less space to get way more food. That still doesn't solve the whole problem, right? I'm still, paying rent for my 3-dimensional farm. The sort of long-term trajectory here is actually intertwined with autonomous vehicles, believe it or not. So if you, fast forward 10 years and, we've got fully autonomous vehicles, we now don't own cars, right? We're just basically, we have transport on demand from fleets of fully autonomous vehicles, and economics being what they are, that means those vehicles will be fully utilized, running around 24 hours a day, just shuttling people from one place to the other. Essentially what that means then is the car never needs to stop. And, in America, 25% of urban build out is parking spaces to house cars that stop. And so, on the very near horizon, you are going to have all of this existing infrastructure in the city that will need a new purpose. There literally will be no need for a parking lot anymore. What are you going to do with them, right? Well, what we're going to do with them is back in, 20, 30 shipping containers and turn it into a 30 or 40 acre farm. And so I'm actually very, very sort of optimistic there, right? That actually, rather than, real estate costs being an issue that prevents the spread of urban farming, I'm actually seeing other macro factors happening that will free up a bunch of, existing infrastructure that will need a new purpose. And urban farming is perfect, as a way to repurpose that existing infrastructure.
I do imagine that you will come to this issue where you're sort of like fighting off property developers who want to turn those parking lots into huge skyscraper buildings.
Well, perhaps, but I've been having very interesting conversations with real estate developers of skyscraper buildings recently, right? Who, especially folks building commercial, property, they want to add, additional services into their building to attract tenants. And, the number of conversations I've had in the last month with people saying, hey, I'm building a 25-story tower block. Can I put a farm on level number 7? Can you just build me a farm in my block? And then, then you're talking about hyperlocal food, right? Because then the people in that building can subscribe to a CSA, a weekly delivery of food from their local farmer, and they can get in the elevator and go, up to floor 7 and meet that farmer, right?
Can't get much fresher than that.
Exactly. I mean, listen, I might sound kind of naive utopian, but and of course, it's going to be way more problematic than the picture that I'm painting. But again, I'm so encouraged by the huge numbers of very creative conversations that I'm having with real estate developers who really appreciate that the consumer wants locally grown food, and they can be part of the solution to bring that to the consumer.
Now, I wanted to just ask about you and your background. You don't seem like you've come from the background where someone would say, oh, this person's going to become a farmer. How did you come to be the person that is driving this urban farming revolution?
Well, first, I wouldn't say I am the person who's driving the revolution. I'm certainly one of many, many very smart people that are doing this. So yeah, I have a PhD in artificial intelligence, right? So yeah, not the most natural pathway to become a farmer. What happened to me is I'm an athlete, a pretty competitive triathlete. So I've always sort of been pretty careful about nutrition, and sort of appreciated that local food, was the best way to do that, right? When food travels, and it takes time to travel, during that time, the nutrients are breaking down into sugars. Food that travels is basically not as good for you as local food. So I was always sort of looking for local food. Anyway, one of my previous tech companies was acquired by a very, very big global retailer that I went to work for a while, and I ended up running mobile commerce inside that retail place for international markets. It sounds very fancy, but basically I had worked with a team that was building mobile shopping apps for people in China and Brazil and the UK and Canada, and basically was, watching hundreds of millions of people a week adding food to their shopping basket that was just not grown in the area that they were living, right? People in the UK adding bananas to their shopping list, for example. And I just got really curious and started thinking, well, okay, where's that food being shipped from, right? And where's that food being grown? And, as a data scientist, I was kind of processing this, and basically I sat on top of a data set of the industrial food system. I was just watching food flying all over the world. And I thought, this is crazy because, not only are the nutrients breaking down and the food's kind of, essentially bad for people when it arrives, but the impact on the planet from all this transport is ridiculous. And so that kind of started me on the path of, okay, let's figure out a solution here. And then when I sort of found, indoor controlled climate urban farming and, sort of fell in love with that model and the community aspect of that model, and also realized I could apply, my AI background to that and really understand how to kind of fine tune climates to grow better food. But the whole thing just made a ton of sense. And I just knew at that point that I was going to spend my next decade trying to, figure this out and basically bring local food to people in cities.
What are you sort of hoping will happen in the next 5 years or so? What will change in terms of the foods that you can grow? What do you think will change in the way that cities adopt urban farming?
My co-founder, Kimbal, Musk and I, we have a saying, which is imagine the next 50 years, plan for the next 6 months. Anything in between is kind of irrelevant because in startup land, like you've got the big picture, right? The moonshot, and let's get on with it. The path that we're painting now to get there is the only thing I know about it is it's not the one that we're going to end up being on. But to try and answer your question, what we're planning for Square Roots is we've got our first farm, our first campus, as we call it, farms, up and running here in Brooklyn. And we've been through one complete program where we've trained farmers and sort of proved that we can do that. And, the food's being sold all around New York and people love it. And that's great. So what we now do is hit the replicate button, basically. So we're now on a pathway to build these urban farming campuses in literally every single city in America. The first sort of 5 or 6, we understand where they're going, and they'll start to appear early next year, which is really exciting. And, beyond that, then we need to think about international, right? And, really what we want to be is this local food company where your local farmer who's growing food that's tasty and that you can trust, but we want to be operating that at a global scale, right? And so along the way there, there's a parallel technology path, right, where we're improving lighting efficiency and working with AI to give farmers better insights on climate so that we can grow not just more food but more varieties of food. Not just leafy greens, but fruits and roots and other things, and, get them to market at really, really competitive prices. And then, I think that the other thing that's going to happen here, if we're looking out over the next kind of 20 or 50 years, is, I talked previously about how we think about repurposing existing infrastructure in the city, right? What other macro trends are happening, like automated vehicles, that will free up existing infrastructure, like car parks, that suddenly need a new purpose, right? And so how can we start to think about, working with the city planners and working with real estate developers and really integrating this idea of urban farming, like weaving it into the fabric of the city, and who knows what shape that's going to take, but it sounds very, very exciting. And I just can't wait to get on with it.
Thanks for listening to Moonshot. If you love what we're doing, then make sure you subscribe to the show on whichever podcasting app you love to use. And make sure you share it with your friends. It's really the best way of helping us build our audience and keep the show going. Moonshot is a production of Lawson Media. It's hosted by me, Christopher Lawson, and also Andrew Moon. Andrew Millist designed our amazing cover artwork, and Breakmaster Cylinder composed our theme track. And if you've got an idea that you'd love us to cover on the show, send us an email to moonshot@lawson.media. Join us again next time on Moonshot as we explore more ideas that are changing our future.